Welcome to More Than Mindfulness with BodySoulSchool.com. My name is Becky Moeller, and today we are talking about what is surrender. And this is a topic we've gotten a lot of questions about. Surrender is something we teach about in our courses. It's a really foundational spiritual practice. In fact, I might go so far as to say it is the foundational spiritual practice. But for most of us who've grown up in a Western culture, surrender, the concept of surrender is like oil and water to the way we typically have been conditioned to approach life and think about things. So surrender is a new concept. It's something that needs practice, and that actually is a practice. It's not a destination. It's a way of moving through life. First, I wanted to start with this quote from Eckhart Tolle. He says, "Until you practice surrender, the spiritual dimension is something you read about, talk about, get excited about, write books about, think about, believe in, or don't. It makes no difference. Not until you surrender does it become a living reality in your life." I love this quote. It speaks so clearly to my experience. I want to re-emphasize the last line of this quote. Not until you surrender does the spiritual dimension become a living reality in your life. Okay, so I just want to talk for a moment about the difference between spirituality and having access to the spiritual dimension and what I thought of as spirituality, which was religiosity, or the things I did that were religious, the outward things, service, going to church, reading scripture, all the things that were happening out here were, in my understanding, were spiritual. And even obedience, things like doing the right thing, following the commandments, keeping the rules, that meant I was a spiritual person. But this whole concept of surrender actually completely changed my perspective on what it meant to be spiritual and what the spiritual dimension was. So being righteous, did that necessarily mean that I was being spiritual? And I could recognize that sometimes the times in my life when I felt the most righteous were the times in my life that I actually had the least access to that spiritual sense of connection and alignment that I could feel at other times. And so the whole concept of surrender was really a reframing for me around what it meant to be spiritual. Surrender really points to what's happening on the inside, and that to be connected to the spiritual dimension means to be aligned with the flow of life and connected to something higher than myself. So for me, I got a crash course in surrender through a rock bottom time in my life. And that really is, I believe, when most people find the power of surrender, because when you're at rock bottom, by definition, that pretty much means you have nowhere else to turn, that all the other tools you've used, all the other ways you've tried to cope with life aren't working. That's what makes it a rock bottom. And when I was at rock bottom, I could feel in my body, mind, and spirit how everything in my life was fighting against the reality of my situation, the reality of my circumstances. I would wake up in the morning and have like kind of this moment of bliss, of unawareness before everything would come flooding back in. And I would be reminded of all the things in my life that felt completely unacceptable to me. And my whole body would start to tense up, would start to tighten, and the narratives in my mind would be screaming, no, 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 this isn't happening, this isn't my life. And living in that kind of resistance started really showing me the power of surrender and how maybe there was a whole different way of moving through life. So what is surrender? Another quote from Eckhart Tolle: "Surrender is the simple but profound wisdom of yielding to rather than opposing the flow of life." What does this mean? For me, started to mean that in the mornings when I would wake up and that moment of awareness and consciousness would flood in, that instead of kicking and screaming and fighting and moaning or denying or refusing to think about it, I would start each day with the third step serenity prayer. And that prayer says, God, I offer myself to thee to build with and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Remove my difficulties, that my victory over them would bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Amen. To me, this prayer is the essence of surrender. To understand that there is a bondage of self, and that even my well-intentioned or righteous desires or ways of thinking and judging were keeping me from yielding to the flow of what was actually happening in my life. That the flow felt like peace, it felt like love, it felt like compassion, it felt like space, it felt like a willingness to experience this moment exactly as it is. And when I could had little glimpses of these kinds of moments, it began to be very obvious to me how different those were from the times when I was approaching life in resistance. I was opposing the flow of life. I was kicking and screaming about the situation. I was judging the people around me. I was judging myself. I was denying what was happening. That's another form of resistance. I was stuffing things down or refusing to talk about things. That's another form of resistance. I was hyper vigilantly trying to control the outcome or control other people and what they chose or how other people perceived me. All of these things were creating chaos and resistance in my life and keeping me from the spiritual dimension. That spiritual dimension is key, because through the spiritual dimension is where the abundance of the universe, of a higher power, of a creator can begin to flow into the cracks and crevices of our lives and work a magic, work a wisdom that is beyond our human capacity. So by yielding to the flow, by getting myself out of the way, I create space for something higher to start to move in. And that's what the practice of surrender is to me. It's having the self-awareness and the mindfulness to recognize when I'm locking into resistance, when I am trying to control something outside of my jurisdiction and ability to control, and to see that the fruits of that are just adding to the chaos and getting in the way. And instead using my breath and my body to relax into the flow of life, to allow life to unfold as it will, and invite space for a higher power to work in me, to get very clear on what I have the power to change and what I don't, and to keep my actions aligned with what is actually mine to control, which really is only my own heart and my own will, my own judgment, my own openness, my own self-awareness and willingness to look in the mirror. Those are really the only things I can control. Now, lots of times we get questions of how do I surrender? I can feel that I'm tight. I can feel I'm trying to control. I can feel that I'm obsessing. How do I actually surrender? And the next video, I'm going to give you some examples about that. But for today, I just want to invite you this week into a practice of awareness into your body, and to recognize the body as one of your most powerful tools of discernment, that your body is so well equipped to help bring you into awareness of when you're in resistance with the flow of life, when you're trying to control. And if you can learn to listen to the signals of the body, you can become very much more skilled at recognizing when it is that you need to surrender, and if there are things you're trying to control that are not serving you or the situation. So just inviting you into this space of mindfulness and even meditation right now. So possibly closing the eyes if that feels comfortable for you. Deepening the breath, softening the gaze if you prefer to keep your eyes open, and just starting with a gentle body scan from the top of the head, just tracing down the body and bringing awareness into any spaces or parts of the body that feel tight and closed. To recognize that this sensation of tightening and contracting and rigidity are at odds with the very essence of surrender, and that our bodies hold this rigidity and can help alert us to the places in our life that need this practice of surrender. Just breathing space into the spaces in the body that are feeling tight or rigid, and giving permission to let go, giving permission to relax and release into the flow of life. Trusting the capacity of something higher to move us through this life with wisdom and integrity, creating space for a higher wisdom than our own. Trusting instead of our own control, trusting in the peace, the compassion, the love, the acceptance, the softness that we find when we're willing to release our grip and accept things as they are. I want you to bring two fists up, clenching the hands into fists, squeezing the hands tight, creating so much tension and energy in the hands, squeezing, breathing, feeling the tension, feeling the tightness, feeling the rigidity. And you might even bring to mind something in your life that is so hard to accept right now, something that you keep feeling this urge and almost compulsive need to control or change or fix, something that just really feels not okay. With your next breath, deep inhale, squeeze tighter, as tight as you can. And with the exhale, I want you to just slowly open the hands, feeling the blood return to the hands, feeling the source, feeling how that opening, that releasing, that letting go allows something higher, something that feels even mystical to flow back into the fingertips, into the palms. And recognizing that this tight, clenching, grasping way of moving through life is actually cutting us off from our source of wholeness. Release. Allowing life to be as it is in this moment, relying on a higher wisdom, a peace and compassion and softness that organically arises when we're willing to face and allow things to be just as they are. And that peace and love, it might often is found underneath grief, underneath the sadness, underneath the despair, underneath the anger. Our willingness to be in those spaces, to move through those emotions, and to accept this life as it is. Bringing us back to this 12-step mantra: I can't, he can, and I will let him. Thank you for practicing with me today. Namaste. If you would like some help learning how to live in a place of surrender, understanding that surrender is a practice and that we're only surrendered one moment at a time, it's something we keep coming back to over and over again, maybe 100 times a day. Our course, which we're launching in April, Living from the Inside Out, is based in this practice of surrender as we move through empowering and healing principles that incorporate mind, body, and spirit. If you're looking for something in your life to help you move into your highest self and into a place where you feel more capacity to navigate life's challenges with peace and purpose and community, please join us. You can learn more at bodysoulschool.com.